Hey guys, it's Paul here with Toolmetrics, and Laguna has shipped us out one of their new Fusion F2 table saws, which fits neatly in the middle of their Fusion saw lineup. You may have seen my videos on the Fusion 1 saw. If not, I'd encourage you to check those out because there's a lot of similarities between that, the Fusion 1 and the Fusion 2. A couple of areas of upgrade include cast iron wings on the Fusion 2, more powerful motor, a single cabinet body design, and a cabinet mounted arbor design. There are probably more subtleties to it. Fence design is upgraded here a bit as well. But I'll share those observations as I open it up. So what I'm going to do in this video is just uncrate it. First observation is this thing shipped in at 367 pounds on a crated pallet. Massive box, and from the outside it appears to be very well packaged. So I'm going to open that up. We can see what's inside. I'll share some highlights from the setup process and then share some observations at the very end as I wrap it up. My first observation in getting the lid off of here is it looks like someone at the factory did most of my assembly work for me. All right, with that side panel removed from the crate, I can still see that more of the assembly is done. Even the hand wheels are installed, dust port is attached. Looks like I've got a couple of boxes of stuff to go through here. So let me finish taking this crate off from around the saw, get it off the skid, and then see what's left to set up. All right, so hammer, pry bar, impact driver, in about 5 minutes was all it took to get the crate off of this. So I will... the saw, as I said, predominantly assembled. Dust collection tubing here. And two other boxes. So what I'm going to do is pull the plastic off of the saw, get the rust inhibiting goop off of there, open up these boxes, and finish the assembly. First thing they may notice, I've removed the table. You may notice that the trunnion assembly is attached on the F2 to the cabinet body rather than on the F1. If you saw those videos, it's attached to the bottom of the table. So as the size of the motor increases, you want more rigidity, and this gives you the F2 provides a more substantial trunnion as well as cast iron components where it attaches to the cabinet body itself. That gives you some vibration dampening as well as just more mass to stabilize the trunnion and ultimately the blade mechanism. So that's going to lead to better cut quality and just more durability over time. We've got like on the F1, we've got a totally enclosed fan-cooled motor. That's going to give you good longevity even in a hot, dusty environment. From below the table, you can also get a look at the arbor locking mechanism that allows you to do blade changes using a single tool, which is a very handy approach. From here, you can also see the really easy lever for releasing and installing the riving knife or the blade guard. Single lever operation, cam locking, locks it in securely. And then a good look at the dust collection shroud. This is really a key feature on the saw, both what happens above the table as well as down below. So this wraps around the blade completely on top and bottom, giving you very good collection in a way that doesn't require a monster dust collector to do it. You're still going to want a good dust collector, but this makes maximum use of the dust collector rather than having to collect from the entire cabinet body of the saw. With this removed, we can also get a good look at the polished steel rods that the motor and trunnion assembly raises up and down on. And that's really important that it raises it in a direct vertical motion. And those are a high quality polished steel rod component. And from here we can also get a look at the dust hose and how it travels from the dust port on the side of the saw, in this case, wrapping through the cabinet and connecting to the shroud underneath the blade area. And one observation I would make about the trunnion assembly is that it is beefed up relative to the F1. Seems to have more material, just more mass in general, a little bit more robust mechanisms. Another thing that I noticed was it had this unique gear mechanism for the blade tilt arm, which was different than on the F1 and I've never seen on a table saw before. And I now realize that it is accelerating the tilt speed, and I can, in 7.5 turns of this crank, move the saw from 90 to 45 degrees. and it does so smoothly and accurately without any slop or play in the wheel mechanism. All right, I got the table back mounted on the saw, got the miter slot and blade aligned, piece of cake on a saw with this design. And I measured then the run out on the tabletop from front to rear, so we're across the solid cast iron surface at about 2/1000ths of an inch, which is fine. And then with a little bit of tweaking, I was able to get it even tighter than that across left to right, going across both seams of the saw. I'm at about 1.5/1000ths of an inch, which is really, really nice and flat. I got a very similar magnetic switch on this saw as the F1 with the nice knee accessible stop button. This one I notice has a reset button, so kind of an integrated breaker. And like on the F1, it allows you to mount it wherever on the fence rail that you'd like it. The aluminum frame fence installs on the front with 5 bolts. Went together nicely with the registration pins that align the left and right components. And I notice on this fence you get a little bit more capacity on the F1. F1 goes up to 30 inches, here we're at 36 inches. Installing the front and rear rails on the F2 is pretty similar to on the F1, with the main difference being on the F2 you don't have to worry about using the rails to flush up the wing with the main saw table, because that work has already been done and you're not going to affect the alignment with the rails. All right, I've got the fence now in place on the rails, and I also brought over the F1 fence just for comparison's sake, so you can get a sense of what you get in the upgrade to the F2. So the F1 fence is a nice fence in its own right. F2 has a lot of similarities. Heavy steel frame, cam locking mechanism, slides nice and easily across the rails, locks down solidly with the cam locking mechanism, and is really rigid when it's in place. Where the F2 gets some noticeable upgrades is that this side panel can be loosened up and repositioned, and it can be slid back and locked down for use, and I'll get into some examples near the end of the video on several different ways that you can use this adjustability in the fence to your advantage. And another feature is that this can be removed and repositioned in low profile mode, and there's some interesting applications for that as well. And I'll get into a lot of detail on that, so stay tuned. Another nice upgrade we get on the F2 is a polished cast hand wheel on both front and side with a steel handle, and nice smooth operating action for raising and lowering as well as tilting. Another nice upgraded feature on the F2 is these integrated wheels, where all you have to do is unlock them, and then you can pick the saw up on the other end and roll it around on the 2 wheels and set it where you want it. The throat plate design on the F2 is pretty sweet. It's got a single lever locking mechanism to unlock and lock the saw. So with it in the lock position, it's securely held in place. By flipping the switch a quarter turn, it's unlocked and can be slid out easily, so you can then access things like swapping out a blade, or popping out the blade guard mechanism, or maybe you want to install the riving knife that comes with the saw for a cut that's too narrow of a rip for the blade guard mechanism. And you lock it in place, put the guard back in, the throat plate, lock it in, and you're ready to go. Just like on the F1, you've got these independent side panels on the blade guard, meaning that if this side is raised up during a cut, this side can still be down on the plate, protecting your fingers. Also, you've got anti-kickback pawls that will lock the board and prevent kickback. Just like on the F1, you've got this above the table dust collection where the hose connects right into the blade guard and wraps around down below and ties into the main 4-inch dust port on the side of the saw on the F2. Really nice capability to collect dust from the top of the table, keep your work surface clean, while at the same time protecting the cabinet of the saw from dust accumulation, and that'll minimize maintenance on the saw. All right, time for the moment of truth. Let's turn the saw on, see what it sounds like. All right, I'm ready to give it a good test here. I've got a 2 1/8 inch slab of red oak. This should be a good test. I'm going to look at 3 things. 1, how does it do feeding such a big slab through? 2, what is the amperage draw during that rip? What does it max out at? And 3, what does the dust collection look like up on top of the saw? All right, so on the three fronts of things that I was looking at, one, feed rate was definitely nice. I didn't have to stop to let the saw catch up at any point. I was able to maintain a moderate feed rate and push it through pretty quickly. On the dust collection, it did a good job. Nothing spraying in my face or hitting me. Left a little bit behind on the table, but really nothing worrisome at all. Nice job overall. And thirdly, on the amperage draw, it was running in the 19 to 20 range, so which isn't bad for a piece of wood that thick. If you're going to do a lot of ripping of things that thick and dense, you may want to consider wiring it for 220, but at least definitely run it on a dedicated 20 amp circuit. All right, with the European design fence on the F2, I've come up with 4 scenarios where I think it's useful. The first one is if you're ripping a long board or sheet good, you're able to slide the fence forward and cheat it up a bit to give yourself a longer runway to stabilize the workpiece before it engages the blade. So this is both a quality and a safety factor. Another use case with the fence in its vertical position is, and this is a common one for me, with a traditional fence design, if you're doing a cross cut using the miter gauge in coordination with the fence, you would put a stop block in place. I usually use an even 1-inch thick one, and then you would clamp it, giving you a point to set your length of cut on your workpiece, and then slide it through the cut, giving you a gap between the fence and the blade. That's really a safety concern, because if without that, it's almost a certain kickback. So with this style fence, no need for a stop block and a clamp near the spinning blade, which is a safety factor and a hassle. You can simply slide the fence out until it's in front of the blade, lock it into place, put the miter gauge and your workpiece in, slide the cut through, measuring off of the fence to set the length of cut, and you can make repeated cuts without concern of kickback. So that's another scenario with the fence vertical. Now, if we flip it into a horizontal orientation, there's a couple other scenarios where I think it's helpful. So the first is, if you're doing veneering, edge banding, or other veneering applications, and the veneer is overhanging the edge of your workpiece, that's a fragile surface to put up against the fence, and it's also not necessarily the orientation or the registration point that you want to use for your rip. You want to use that hard jointed surface that you have on the hardwood or plywood. So by sliding the workpiece in so that the solid portion of the piece engages the fence and allowing the veneer to overhang the fence, now you've got good engagement, you're going to get a better cut quality, and it's a safer rip. And then the final scenario, which I think is going to come in common for a lot of people who are doing cutting boards or other applications where you require thin ripping. On a traditional fence, the closest you can get to the blade, or the safest narrow rip that you can get with the blade guard in place, is about 2 inches. Now, with the fence in this orientation, I can slide that much closer. And so now I'm within about, I'd say I've got maybe a 1/2 inch or so cut that I can make without having to remove the blade guard, which that's one of those scenarios where the more easy it is to make thin rips with the blade guard in place, the more likely you are to leave it in place and have it protecting you. Great safety feature. It doesn't work when it's not on the saw. So those are the 4 scenarios that I can think of. I'd be interested to hear if others who use this style fence have other ideas on how it can be used to enhance your woodworking experience. All right, that wraps up my look at the Fusion F2 table saw from Laguna. Just to kind of summarize, I think that the 1 3/4 horsepower motor offers about as much fun as you can have with 110 volts, with the upgrade option to go to 220 if you want to swap out the switch. Love the European fence design. You're going to get a lot of use out of that, both from a quality and a safety perspective. And then the integrated dust collection that is the same as on the F1 saw. It comes in very handy and really keeps a cleaner, more healthy shop environment. So with that, let me know if you have questions down below. I'll be happy to answer anything that I can. And thank you for watching this. I hope you'll subscribe and come back to the Toolmetrics channel for more woodworking, wood turning, DIY, and tool-related videos.